The forest swallowed Cassia whole the moment she crossed beyond the last marker stone that delineated the edge of Roman civilization. Behind her, the road to Rome stretched like a pale scar through the landscape, a symbol of everything she was fleeing. The marble villas with their false promises of luxury, the Senate halls where her fate had been decided without her consent, the betrothal contract signed in her father's blood-red seal that would have bound her to Marcus Valerius, a man whose cruelty was whispered about even in the slave quarters. She had run with nothing but the clothes on her back, a small knife stolen from the kitchen, and a desperation so profound it felt like a living thing clawing at her chest. The forest welcomed her with indifference, its ancient pines rising like columns in a temple dedicated to older gods than those Rome claimed to honor. Mist clung to the ground, transforming familiar shapes into phantoms, and Cassia moved through it like a ghost herself. Her name was Cassia Liviana, daughter of Senator Marcus Livianus, a man who had built his fortune through careful political alliances and strategic marriages. She was his only surviving child, the vessel through which his bloodline would continue, the bargaining chip he had finally decided to play. Marcus Valerius was wealthy, connected, and eager for a young wife who would give him heirs, and ask no questions about the bruises his previous wives had worn like jewelry before their convenient deaths. Cassia had asked questions. She had refused. She had pleaded with her father to reconsider, to find another match, to give her time. But time was a luxury Senator Livianus could not afford. The betrothal had been announced, the dowry agreed upon, the wedding date set. In 2 weeks, Cassia would have been married, and in 2 months she would likely have joined Valerius's previous wives in the family tomb. So she had run, slipping away during the night, carrying nothing that could be traced back to her father's house. She had walked for 2 days, staying off main roads, sleeping in ditches and abandoned shepherds' huts, eating berries and drinking from streams. Her fine silk dress had torn on thorns until it hung in rags. Her carefully maintained hands had blistered and bled, and her elaborately styled hair had come loose to hang in tangled waves down her back. By the 3rd day, when she found the cabin, she was beyond exhaustion. It appeared suddenly through the mist like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to form. A small structure of rough-hewn logs, its roof partially collapsed on one side, its single window covered with oiled cloth that had long since rotted away. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, and when Cassia pushed it open, she found a single room that smelled of decay and abandonment. But it was shelter. It was hidden, and most importantly, it was far enough from Rome that no one would think to look for her here. The cabin had been a hunting lodge once. She guessed from the antlers mounted on the wall and the remains of what had been a fireplace in one corner. Someone had abandoned it years ago, leaving behind broken furniture and scattered evidence of human habitation slowly being reclaimed by the forest. A table stood against one wall, its surface warped by moisture. A stool lay on its side. What had once been a sleeping pallet was now just rotted straw that harbored mice and insects. Cassia spent her first hour making it minimally habitable. She cleared away debris, used fallen branches to prop up the sagging door, and tried unsuccessfully to light a fire in the fireplace before accepting she would sleep cold. As darkness fell and the forest came alive with night sounds, owls calling, branches creaking, distant howls that might have been wolves, she huddled in the corner and tried not to think about everything she had left behind. She had grown up in luxury, surrounded by slaves who attended her every need, eating foods imported from across the empire, wearing silks and jewelry crafted by master artisans. Her days had been filled with music lessons and poetry recitations, with elaborate hairstyling sessions and discussions of philosophy. She had been educated far beyond what was typical for a Roman woman, because her father had believed an intelligent daughter could make a more advantageous match. Now she sat on a dirt floor in a ruined cabin, her stomach empty, her body aching, her future reduced to however long she could survive before starvation or exposure claimed her. But even in her misery, Cassia felt something she had not felt in months, a fierce, defiant joy that she had chosen this, that she had refused to be a passive victim of her father's political machinations or Valerius's cruelty. The first night was the hardest. Every sound made her freeze, convinced that soldiers had found her. But dawn came without discovery, and she realized with a mixture of relief and terror that perhaps no one was looking for her at all. Perhaps her father had decided she was more trouble than she was worth, had written her off as dead or lost. Days passed in a blur of survival. Cassia learned to trap small animals using snares made from her torn dress. She found a stream nearby where she could drink and wash. She gathered edible plants, mushrooms she was only 70% certain were not poisonous, roots that tasted like dirt but filled her stomach, berries that stained her fingers purple. She repaired the cabin's roof using fallen branches and pine boughs, creating shelter that would at least keep out most of the rain. She did not think about the future beyond the next day. The forest became familiar rather than frightening, its rhythms part of her daily existence. She learned to move quietly through the underbrush, to avoid leaving obvious trails, to cover her tracks. A week passed, then 2. Cassia began to believe she might actually survive this, that she could build some kind of life in the wilderness. It would not be the life she had once imagined, but it would be hers, claimed by choice rather than imposed by others. She was wrong, of course. Freedom was never that simple, and fate had plans that did not care about her desires. The knock came at dusk on the 15th day of her hiding, shattering the silence of the forest and the fragile peace she had built. Cassia froze, her hand moving instinctively to the knife she now kept always within reach. Her heart hammered as she stared at the crooked door, watching it rattle as whoever stood outside knocked again, more insistently. It could be soldiers. It could be her father's men. It could be bandits or barbarians or any of 100 threats that lurked in the wild places beyond Rome's borders. Cassia held her breath, hoping whoever it was would assume the structure was abandoned and move on. But the knock came a third time, and with it a voice, male, rough with exhaustion or pain, speaking in Latin that carried the accent of Rome's highest classes. "Please," the voice said, barely above a whisper. "I mean no harm. I need shelter, just for tonight." Cassia did not move, her mind racing. This could be a trap, but something in the voice, the genuine weakness, the desperation that matched her own, made her hesitate. "I am wounded," the voice continued. "I will not make it through the night without shelter. Please, I ask nothing else." Against every instinct, Cassia found herself moving toward the door. She kept her knife raised, ready to strike. With her free hand, she pushed the door open just enough to peer through the gap. What she saw made her breath catch. A man stood on her threshold, covered in mud and blood and travel-stained fabric. He wore a cloak that had once been fine but was now torn and filthy, and beneath it, she glimpsed damaged armor. He was tall, powerfully built, and leaning heavily against the doorframe as if standing required all his remaining strength. But it was his eyes that held her attention, golden, like the coins that bore the emperor's image, gleaming even in the fading light with an intensity that seemed almost inhuman. "Please," he said again, and those golden eyes met hers with a directness that made her feel simultaneously seen and endangered. "I will not harm you. I swear it on all the gods Rome knows and those she has forgotten." Cassia stood frozen, knife in hand, staring at the wounded stranger. Every rational thought screamed at her to refuse, to shut the door, to protect the sanctuary she had built. But something deeper, call it compassion or curiosity, or simply the recognition of another soul running from something, made her step aside and gesture for him to enter. "Thank you," the stranger breathed, stumbling through the doorway and collapsing against the wall, his golden eyes closing. "Thank you." And Cassia, who had fled to avoid being claimed by a cruel man, found herself face to face with a stranger who would change everything about the future she thought she had chosen. The stranger collapsed fully the moment Cassia closed the door, sliding down the wall to sit on the dirt floor with his head bowed and his breathing labored. In the dim light filtering through the gaps in the cabin's walls, Cassia could see him more clearly now, or rather, see the extent of the damage he had sustained. His cloak was not merely travel-stained, but soaked through with blood, both dried and fresh. The armor beneath had been pierced in at least 3 places, and his left arm hung at an angle that suggested serious injury. For a long moment, neither spoke. Cassia remained by the door, her knife still raised though her arm trembled. The stranger kept his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling with breaths that rattled slightly. She had seen enough hunting accidents to recognize serious injury. This man needed a physician, needed proper medical care, needed far more than a runaway woman in an abandoned cabin could provide. "You are bleeding," she finally said, her voice strange in her own ears after so many days of silence. The stranger's golden eyes opened, focusing on her with an intensity that made her step backward. "Yes," he agreed simply. "I am aware of that fact. How badly are you hurt?" Badly enough that I will likely die without assistance, he replied with unsettling calmness. But not so badly that death is immediate. I have perhaps a day, maybe two, if the gods are merciful. He shifted slightly, wincing. Though I confess, the gods have shown me little mercy of late. Cassia's mind raced through her options. She could refuse to help, could wait for him to die and then dispose of the body. It would be the safest choice, the most rational decision. But looking at him, at the way he struggled for each breath, at the pain he was clearly masking, at the resignation in those strange golden eyes, she found she could not simply let him die. She lowered her knife slightly. I am not a physician. I have some knowledge of herbs and basic wound treatment, but if your injuries are as severe as they appear, I may be able to do little more than make you comfortable. Comfort would be a considerable improvement over my current state, the stranger said, attempting what might have been a smile. I will take whatever assistance you are willing to provide. Cassia hesitated a moment longer, then made her decision. She moved to the fireplace, where she had stored her meager supplies, a clay pot for water, strips of cloth torn from her dress for bandages, a few medicinal herbs she had recognized. I will need to see your wounds. Can you remove your armor or do you need help? I fear I will need help, the stranger admitted. My left arm is not cooperative. She approached cautiously, still wary. Up close, she could see more details. That his hair, matted with blood and dirt, was dark with streaks of early gray. That his face, beneath the grime and stubble, had the strong features and bearing of nobility. That his hands were calloused in the way of men who trained regularly with weapons. You are a soldier, she said, more statement than question. I have been many things, he replied cryptically. Soldier is one of them. The armor came away in pieces, revealing a tunic beneath that was more blood than fabric. Cassia tried to maintain clinical detachment as she cut away the cloth, but she could not help but notice the scars that covered his torso, old wounds that spoke of a lifetime of combat. And among the old scars were new wounds, fresh and bleeding. The worst was a deep gash along his left side, just below the ribs. The edges were ragged, suggesting a blade had torn rather than cut cleanly, and she could see the pale gleam of bone beneath. There was another wound in his shoulder, a puncture that had narrowly missed major blood vessels, and numerous smaller cuts and bruises. Gods! Cassia breathed, pressing her hand to her mouth. How are you still alive? How did you even walk to this cabin with wounds like these? Stubbornness, the stranger replied, though his voice had grown weaker, and perhaps a trace of divine intervention. His golden eyes met hers. Will you tell me your name? I would like to know who is trying to save my life. Cassia hesitated. Giving her name meant revealing who she was, meant risking recognition. But looking at him, at a man who might be dead by morning, withholding her name seemed pointlessly cruel. Cassia, she said finally. My name is Cassia. Cassia, he repeated as if testing the sound. A good Roman name. I am. He paused, and something flickered in his expression. Calculation or caution. You may call me Septimus. She noticed the hesitation, filed it away. Septimus. Very well, now hold still. This will hurt. She had spoken truth when she said she was not a physician, but her education had included basic medical knowledge. She knew how to clean wounds, how to stitch torn flesh, which herbs reduced fever and which promoted healing. She worked methodically, first cleaning the injuries with water heated over a fire she finally managed to coax to life. Septimus endured her ministrations with gritted teeth and occasional sharp intakes of breath, but he did not cry out. You have done this before, he observed after she had finished stitching the gash in his side. Your hands are too steady, your movements too confident. I have treated injured slaves and servants in my father's household, Cassia said, not mentioning that she had often been forbidden from doing so, though none with injuries quite this severe. And what is a senator's daughter doing hiding in an abandoned cabin in the wilderness? Septimus asked, his golden eyes sharp despite his weakened state. That is what you are, yes? Your Latin is too refined, your bearing too aristocratic to be anything else. Cassia's hands stilled. How did you? I have spent enough time at court to recognize breeding when I see it, Septimus replied, just as you have no doubt recognized that I am more than a simple soldier. So we are both hiding, both running from something. Perhaps that makes us allies of circumstance. She resumed her work, tying off the bandage with more force than necessary. I fled a betrothal to a man who has killed 2 wives already. I will not be his 3rd victim, so yes, I am hiding, I am running, and I have no intention of being found. A reasonable position. Septimus said, "and one I sympathize with, given that I am also currently attempting to avoid being found by people who wish me dead." "Who are you running from?" Cassia asked, moving to treat the puncture wound in his shoulder. "What battle left you with these wounds?" Septimus was quiet for a long moment. "An ambush on the northern frontier. My companions and I were returning from a diplomatic mission when we were attacked by forces that should not have been there. Most of my party was killed. I managed to escape, but barely." "And who would want to kill diplomats?" Cassia pressed. "Unless the goal is not military victory but political chaos," Septimus replied. "Unless someone wants to ensure that certain treaties are never signed, that certain alliances are never formed. But these are dangerous topics, Cassia. The less you know, the safer you will be if my enemies track me here." She finished bandaging his shoulder and sat back, studying him in the firelight. His color was slightly better now that the bleeding had been staunched, but he was still gravely injured, still weak. He needed rest, needed food, needed time to heal. "You should sleep," she said finally. "I will keep watch." "You do not trust me," Septimus observed, though there was no accusation in his tone. "I do not know you," Cassia corrected. "You appeared at my door wounded and desperate. I have provided shelter, but that does not mean I will let my guard down completely." "Wise," Septimus agreed. "Trust should be earned, not freely given." "Very well, Cassia, who fled a cruel betrothal. I will sleep, and you will keep your knife close, and in the morning we will see if either of us has been found." He closed his golden eyes, his breathing gradually evening out as exhaustion claimed him. Cassia remained sitting by the fire, knife close at hand, watching the stranger who had transformed her solitary refuge into something far more complicated. She had fled into the wilderness to avoid being claimed by Marcus Valerius, to escape the fate her father had arranged. But now she found herself bound to a different fate entirely, responsible for a wounded man whose identity she suspected but dared not voice, whose presence could bring danger she could not imagine. Outside, the forest whispered with night sounds, and inside the small cabin, two people who should never have met, a senator's runaway daughter and a man with golden eyes who spoke like nobility but bled like any mortal, began a strange partnership born of necessity and mutual desperation. Neither could have known that the knock at her door had not been chance, that fate had plans far more elaborate than simple survival. But they would learn soon enough. Dawn came slowly to the forest, pale light filtering through the pine branches and the gaps in the cabin's walls. Cassia had not slept, had spent the entire night sitting by the dying fire with her knife across her lap, watching Septimus for any sign of threat or deterioration. He had slept fitfully, his breathing sometimes labored, occasionally crying out, words she could not quite distinguish, though once she thought she heard treachery, and another time what might have been names of the fallen. As morning light touched his face, his golden eyes opened, and for a moment he seemed disoriented. Then his gaze found her, still sitting in the same position, and something like gratitude crossed his features. "You stayed awake," he observed, his voice rough but stronger than the night before. "All night, I presume." "I do not know you well enough to sleep in your presence," Cassia replied, "and someone needed to ensure you did not die from fever or reopened wounds." Septimus pushed himself up slowly, wincing but managing to sit upright. "Fair enough. And did I? Die, that is?" "Not yet," Cassia said, allowing herself a small smile. "Your fever broke around midnight, and your wounds have not bled through the bandages. You are stronger than you appeared. Or more stubborn, as I mentioned." He looked down at his bandaged torso, then back at her. "You saved my life, Cassia. That is a debt I take seriously. You can repay it by healing quickly and leaving before whoever is hunting you finds this place," Cassia said, standing and stretching stiff muscles. "I came here to hide from my own troubles. I do not need yours as well." "A reasonable stance," Septimus agreed, "though I fear events may not cooperate." "I heard dogs in the distance last night while I drifted between sleep and waking. Hunting dogs, moving in a pattern. They are searching the forest systematically." Cassia felt ice flood her veins. "Your enemies? Quite possibly. Or yours. Or simply hunters. But we would be foolish to assume the best." He attempted to stand, managed it with effort. "We should prepare for the possibility that we have been, or will soon be, found. There is nowhere to run," Cassia said, moving to the window. "This cabin was my refuge because it is remote and forgotten. But that also means there are no other places to hide." "Then we do not flee," Septimus said, moving beside her despite clear pain. "We defend. Or better yet, we deceive. Deceive how? Septimus was quiet for a moment, his golden eyes thoughtful. If soldiers come searching, whether for me or for you, what would they be looking for? A runaway senator's daughter, Cassia said. Alone, hiding, and a missing diplomat, Septimus added. Also alone, also hiding. But what if they found neither? What if they found instead a married couple, travelers whose cart broke down, taking temporary shelter while they repair their vehicle? Cassia stared at him. You want us to pretend to be married? It is the simplest deception, Septimus argued. It explains why we are here together, why we have no servants, why we are in such rough condition. We are simple merchants, perhaps, or minor landowners. No one of importance. Except for your eyes, Cassia pointed out. Those are not the eyes of a simple merchant. They are distinctive, memorable. Anyone who has seen the emperor's image on coins would recognize. She stopped abruptly, the words dying as realization crashed over her like a cold wave. The golden eyes, the bearing of nobility, the diplomatic mission, the ambush that killed his companions, the enemies hunting him. Gods, she whispered, you are not a diplomat. You are Septimus Aurelius. You are the emperor. Septimus held her gaze steadily, neither confirming nor denying, waiting to see what she would do with this knowledge. I had hoped you would not make that connection quite so quickly, he finally said, though I suppose I should have known better. You are clearly intelligent, and I have been careless. Careless? Cassia's voice rose. You are the emperor of Rome. You have been missing for months. The entire empire believes you dead, killed in the ambush. The Senate has been in chaos. Your brother Lucius has claimed regency. There have been riots in 3 provinces. She stopped, breathing hard. And you have been hiding in the wilderness while Rome tears itself apart. Not by choice, Septimus replied, his voice hardening. The ambush was not random, Cassia. It was not barbarians or bandits. It was Roman soldiers, sent by someone within the palace itself, someone who wants me dead so they can claim the throne. If I return to Rome before I know who betrayed me, I will simply be killed more efficiently. Cassia sank onto the stool, her legs unable to support her. Your brother. You think Lucius ordered the ambush? I do not know, Septimus admitted. Lucius benefits most obviously from my death. But the conspiracy could run deeper. Senators who want a weaker emperor, generals who resent my peace treaties, merchants who profit from war. Without proof, I cannot simply return and accuse my own brother of treason. I need time to heal, to think, to gather loyal allies. And so you hide in an abandoned cabin, tended by a runaway bride. Cassia laughed without humor. The emperor of Rome and a senator's daughter, both fugitives in our own empire. It would be absurd if it were not so dangerous. Septimus moved closer, lowering himself carefully to sit on the floor beside her. I did not mean to involve you in imperial politics. When I knocked on your door last night, I truly had no idea this cabin was occupied. I was simply looking for shelter before continuing my journey to the coast where I have allies I believe I can trust. But now I know who you are, Cassia said, which makes me either a valuable ally or a dangerous liability. And which do you think I see you as? Septimus asked, his golden eyes studying her face. Cassia considered seriously. You would be wise to see me as a liability. I am the daughter of Senator Livianus, who has influence in the Senate. If my father learned I had encountered you, he would use that information however best served his political interests, and I cannot predict whether that would help or harm you. But you are running from your father, Septimus pointed out. You fled an arranged marriage, chose wilderness and possible death over submission to his plans. That suggests you make your own choices. I make my own choices, Cassia agreed, which is why you must understand. I did not save your life because I knew you were the emperor. I saved you because you were a wounded man at my door. And I will not betray you to your enemies or use your vulnerability for my own gain. But I also will not be dragged into imperial politics, will not become a piece in whatever game is being played in Rome. Fair enough, Septimus said. Then let us make a bargain. We maintain the deception if soldiers come. We are married travelers, no one important. I will not reveal your identity to anyone. Will ensure your father never learns you are here. In exchange, you allow me to remain until my wounds are healed enough to continue my journey. A week, perhaps 2. Then I leave, and you can return to your solitude. And if your enemies find you before you are healed enough to flee, Cassia asked, then you claim I forced you to help me. that you are an innocent victim. You will not be punished for aiding me under duress." He paused. "I would not let harm come to you because of my presence. That much I can promise." Cassia studied him. This man who ruled the greatest empire the world had known, who commanded legions and shaped the fates of millions, yet who sat bleeding on the floor of a ruined cabin, dependent on her mercy and her silence. "Very well," she finally said. "We will pretend to be married if soldiers come. You will rest and heal, and in 2 weeks you leave and we never speak of this again." "Agreed," Septimus said, extending his hand. Cassia took it, feeling the calluses from sword training, the strength still present despite his injuries. "Though I should warn you, I know nothing about playing the role of a wife. My betrothal was arranged so quickly I never even met Valerius. And I have been a widower for 5 years, Septimus replied. "My late wife Julia would likely laugh to see me attempting to play devoted husband in a wilderness cabin. So we will both be improvising, but perhaps that will make our performance more believable. Newly married, still learning each other. Perhaps," Cassia agreed uncertainly. They spent the rest of the morning preparing their story. They were Marcus and Lucia, Septimus decided. Common names that would not attract attention. Married only 3 months, traveling from her family's estate to his lands when their cart had broken an axle. They had taken shelter here while he repaired it, a process delayed by his accidental injury when the cart initially failed. It was a simple story, and simple stories were often the most believable. They practiced telling it, correcting details, ensuring their accounts matched. And as they worked, Cassia found herself noticing things about this man who was emperor. The way his intelligence showed in how quickly he thought through contingencies, the way he treated her as an equal partner rather than a subordinate to be ordered. It was not what she had expected from the Emperor of Rome. But then, nothing about this situation matched her expectations when she had fled into the wilderness, and now she found herself bound by a different kind of claim, not marriage or betrothal, but conspiracy, and shared danger and the strange intimacy of 2 people who had nothing but each other against a world that wanted them both destroyed. The soldiers came on the 3rd day. Cassia heard them first, the distant sound of men moving through the forest with less care for stealth than for speed, calling to each other as they spread out to search. She had been gathering water from the stream when the sounds reached her, and she froze, the clay pot slipping from her hands to shatter on the rocks. She ran back to the cabin, finding Septimus already alert, standing despite the pain it clearly caused him, his hand on a sword he had retrieved from his hidden weapons. His golden eyes met hers with the same calculation she felt. Fight or deceive, resist or submit, risk everything on their hastily constructed lie. "How many?" he asked quietly. "I could not tell. At least 6, perhaps more. They are searching systematically, moving from south to north. They will reach this cabin within minutes." Septimus nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we proceed as planned. You are Lucia, my wife. We are travelers. Nothing more." He paused. "And Cassia, no matter what happens, maintain the fiction. Your life depends on it." "As does yours," she replied, moving to stand beside him at the window. Within moments, soldiers emerged from the tree line. 8 men in the armor of the Praetorian Guard, the elite troops who served as the emperor's personal protectors. Cassia felt her stomach drop. If the Praetorians were searching, it meant someone powerful had ordered it. The soldiers approached cautiously, weapons drawn, spreading out to cover all approaches. Their leader, a centurion whose scarred face spoke of long service, stepped forward and hammered on the door. "Open, in the name of the emperor," he commanded. Septimus shot Cassia a look that might have been ironic, then moved to open the door. He had changed his bearing subtly. The regal posture had become slightly hunched, the commanding presence dampened to something ordinary. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his accent shifting to something more provincial. "We are simple travelers, taking shelter while we repair our cart. We have done nothing wrong." The centurion's eyes swept over Septimus, taking in his bandaged torso, his rough appearance. "You are alone here?" "My wife is inside," Septimus replied, gesturing to where Cassia stood. "We have been here 3 days, waiting for me to heal enough to continue our journey. A wheel broke and I was injured trying to repair it. We are searching for fugitives," the centurion said, pushing past Septimus into the cabin. His men followed, scanning every corner. A woman run away from a betrothal contract, and a man, possibly wounded, possibly dangerous. "Have you seen anyone else in these woods?" "No one," Septimus said. We have kept to ourselves, concerned more with survival than with other travelers. The centurion's gaze fell on Cassia, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She forced herself to meet his eyes calmly, showing neither the fear she felt nor the defiance that wanted to surge up. She was Lucia, she reminded herself, a merchant's wife, no one important. You, the centurion said, pointing at her. Come here. Cassia moved forward, stopping beside Septimus. The centurion circled them slowly, taking in every detail, their rough clothing, their worn appearance, the obvious signs of hardship. Your eyes, the centurion said, stopping in front of Septimus. They are unusual. Gold like that is rare. My mother was from the east, Septimus replied without hesitation. Cappadocia. Many in her family had such eyes. It is a curiosity, nothing more. And your wound? You say it came from a cart repair? A wheel broke while we were descending a hill. The cart shifted and the axle caught me. Foolish, I know, but we could not afford to lose our cargo. The centurion did not look entirely convinced. He turned to Cassia. And you, woman, what is your name? Lucia, Cassia replied, proud that her voice remained steady. Wife to Marcus here, married these 3 months past. Your family? Minor landowners near Ostia. My father owns a small olive grove. He was pleased to marry me to a merchant with prospects. She allowed a small smile, though he might be less pleased to see those prospects now, stranded in a forest. One of the other soldiers whispered something to the centurion. The centurion nodded, then turned back. We will search the area around your cabin. If you are hiding anyone, it will go better for you if you reveal them now. Search as you wish, Septimus said. You will find nothing. The soldiers spread out, combing through the forest with practiced efficiency. Cassia and Septimus remained inside, maintaining their roles, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke of shared tension. Septimus sat on the stool, favoring his injured side, playing the wounded merchant convincingly. After what felt like hours but was likely 30 minutes, the soldiers returned. The centurion entered one final time, his expression frustrated. We found no one, he admitted. But if you do encounter other travelers, particularly a young woman alone or a wounded man with military bearing, you are commanded to report it immediately. There is a reward for information. How much? Septimus asked, the perfect question for a merchant. 50 gold auri for the woman, 100 for the man. The centurion's eyes narrowed, though I would advise caution. The man is considered extremely dangerous. Do not attempt to apprehend him yourself. Noted, Septimus said. We will keep watch. The soldiers departed, their voices fading back into the forest. Cassia and Septimus remained frozen for long minutes after the last sound had died away, barely breathing, waiting to ensure the soldiers were truly gone. When Septimus finally moved to bar the door, Cassia felt her legs give way and she sank onto the floor, trembling with released tension. Septimus joined her, lowering himself carefully beside her. That was too close, Cassia finally said. If that centurion had looked at you more carefully, but he did not. Septimus interrupted gently. We were convincing. You were perfect. This time, Cassia said, but they will return. Eventually someone will recognize you. Septimus was quiet, then spoke words that changed everything. There is something I have not told you. About my wounds. About why they take so long to heal. Cassia turned to look at him, seeing vulnerability in his expression. What do you mean? The ambush that nearly killed me. It was not just soldiers and blades. There was a priest among them, a priest of the old gods. He spoke words as I fell, words in a language older than Latin, and I felt something change, break. He pulled aside his tunic to show her the worst wound, the gash along his ribs. But now Cassia saw something she had missed. The edges were marked with symbols, faint lines that looked like writing in an unknown alphabet. A curse, she breathed. The gods cursed you? The priest said I was being punished for hubris, for claiming divine descent when I carry no true divine blood. He said I would heal only when the lie of my divinity was exposed, when someone loved me not as emperor but as man, when love was given freely, without knowledge of my power. Septimus laughed bitterly. The emperor who claimed divine ancestry can only be saved by mortal love freely given. Cassia stared at him. That is why you did not immediately reveal who you were. You were testing whether I would help you anyway. I did not consciously plan it, Septimus admitted. But yes, some part of me understood that if I revealed my identity immediately, Any assistance would be tainted by political considerations. The curse requires love freely given, Cassia. Not loyalty to an emperor, but genuine human connection between equals. And you think I can break this curse? Cassia asked. That is why you suggested we pretend to be married. You are hoping that in playing the role, something genuine might develop. I am hoping, Septimus said quietly, that perhaps it already has. You saved my life before you knew who I was. You have shown me kindness without expectation of reward. That is more than anyone has done in years. Cassia stood pacing. So your wounds will not heal, you will eventually die, unless I fall in love with you. I fled to avoid being claimed by one man, only to find another man's life depends on my feelings. I know, Septimus said, and I am sorry. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was desperate and He stopped, looking away. I have no right to ask anything of you. You have already saved my life once. You owe me nothing. Cassia stopped, looking at this man who was emperor, who commanded legions, yet who sat waiting to see if she would condemn him or offer hope, and she thought about how he had treated her as an equal, had respected her intelligence and choices. How different that was from her father's dismissive authority or Valerius's cruel possession. We will take this one day at a time, she finally said. I make no promises about love. That is not something that can be forced, but I will not abandon you. We will continue our deception if more soldiers come, and we will see what develops between us, naturally. Septimus looked up at her, hope kindling in his golden eyes. That is more than I deserve. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Cassia replied. If I am to be your salvation, we have a long way to go. But it might happen, Septimus said. And that possibility is more than I have had since the curse was laid. And in the gathering dusk, two unlikely allies sat together in an abandoned cabin, bound now not just by deception, but by the faint possibility that their fiction might become truth. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of domesticity that neither Cassia nor Septimus had anticipated. During the day, they maintained their vigilance, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested. But gradually, as the immediate danger seemed to recede and no more soldiers appeared, they began to settle into a routine that felt almost normal. Cassia tended Septimus's wounds daily, changing bandages and applying fresh poultices. She noticed that the cursed symbols on his flesh seemed to pulse faintly sometimes, particularly when he grew frustrated or angry. The wounds were healing, but far more slowly than they should have, and she could see the toll it took on him. For his part, Septimus made himself useful despite his limitations. He repaired the cabin's roof more thoroughly, reinforced the door and window coverings, and even constructed crude furniture from fallen branches. He worked methodically, and Cassia noticed that physical labor seemed to ease some of the tension that coiled in him. They talked during those long days and evenings, not about politics or curses or dangers, but about smaller things, childhood memories, favorite foods, books they had read. Cassia learned that Septimus had been raised by tutors after his mother died when he was 7, that he had never wanted to be emperor, but had accepted the burden when his older brother died, that he loved astronomy and would spend hours watching the stars when palace duties permitted. Septimus learned that Cassia had been educated far beyond most Roman women, that she could read Greek and had memorized long passages of Homer and Virgil, that she had always felt trapped by her father's expectations, by the role society demanded she play. You would have made an excellent scholar, Septimus observed one evening as they sat by the fire. Better than most of the philosophers who cluster around the palace. Women are not permitted to be scholars, Cassia replied. We are meant to be wives and mothers, to manage households and produce heirs. Many things considered natural are merely habit, Septimus said. If I ever return to my throne, perhaps I will change those expectations. Establish schools for women, open the libraries to all. You would face riots, Cassia predicted. The Senate would claim you were destroying the moral fabric of Rome. At least I would be destroying it for a worthwhile cause, Septimus replied dryly. But their growing ease was shattered on the 15th day, when the true hunt began. Cassia was returning from the stream when she heard the dogs. Not distant baying, but close, urgent, the sound of hounds that had caught a scent and were closing in. She dropped the water and ran, bursting into the cabin to find Septimus already on his feet, sword in hand, his face grim. They have found us, he said simply. We need to decide. Do we run or do we stand? You are still too weak to run far, Cassia said, moving to the window. Through the trees, she could see torchlight, many torches, moving in an organized pattern. And there are too many. This is not a simple search party. This is a coordinated hunt. Then we stand, Septimus said, moving to bar the door. We maintain the fiction as long as possible. We are married travelers. They know, Cassia interrupted, her voice hollow. Look, through the trees, they could see a figure on horseback, tall and commanding, wearing gleaming armor. As he drew closer, directing the soldiers who spread out around the cabin, Cassia could see his face clearly. He looked remarkably like Septimus, the same strong features, the same bearing, but his eyes were dark where Septimus's were gold, and his expression held a cruelty that Septimus's lacked. Lucius, Septimus breathed, his hand tightening on his sword. My brother. So it was him after all. He is here personally, Cassia said. That means he is certain you are here, that he knows you survived. The cabin was surrounded now, torches forming a ring around their shelter. Lucius dismounted and approached the door. Brother, Lucius called out, I know you are in there. There is no point in continuing this charade. One of my men recognized you during the first search. He said nothing then, waiting to report to me directly. Very loyal. I rewarded him handsomely before I had him killed, of course. Septimus closed his eyes briefly. He kills his own men to ensure silence. Come out, Septimus, Lucius continued. Come out and face me with whatever dignity you have left, or I will burn this cabin with you inside it. Your choice. He will kill you either way, Cassia whispered urgently, unless I go out first, unless I tell them you are not here, that I am alone, that I am the runaway senator's daughter. They will be distracted by capturing me. You can escape through the back window. Absolutely not, Septimus said flatly. I will not sacrifice you to save myself. That solves nothing. Better that than both of us dead, Cassia argued. Your life is worth more than mine. You are the emperor. Rome needs you. You are not just anything, Septimus said fiercely, gripping her shoulders. You saved my life when you had no reason to. Your life has exactly as much value as mine, and I will not spend it like a coin. Outside, Lucius was growing impatient. I'm going to count to 10. If you have not emerged, I will give the order to set the cabin ablaze. 1, 2, 3. There has to be another way, Cassia said desperately. 4, 5, 6. The curse, Septimus said suddenly. You said love freely given could break it. Cassia, do you? 7, 8. I do not know, Cassia said, tears streaming down her face. I care for you, Septimus. These past 2 weeks I have come to know you, to respect you, to feel something I cannot name. But is it love? How can I know in such a short time? 9. Septimus took her face in his hands, his golden eyes searching hers. Cassia, I do not know if we will survive the next few minutes, but I know that in these 2 weeks, you have given me something I have not had since I took the throne. You have seen me as a man, not as an emperor. You have treated me as an equal, and I have felt more alive than I have in 10 years of wearing the purple. 10. I love you, Septimus said simply. Perhaps that is not enough to break a curse. Perhaps we both die here tonight, but I wanted you to know that you were loved freely and truly by a man who asked nothing in return. Cassia felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked away since she fled her father's house. She had been so determined not to be claimed that she had forgotten love was not about claiming or possession. It was about choice, about seeing and being seen. I love you too, she whispered, and as the words left her lips, she knew them to be true. The moment she spoke, light blazed from Septimus's wounds. The cursed symbols that had pulsed faintly for weeks suddenly flared with brilliant golden radiance. Septimus cried out, but not in pain, in release, as invisible chains shattered and fell away. Outside, soldiers shouted in confusion as light poured through every gap in the cabin's walls, illuminating the entire forest. Lucius's voice rose above the chaos, commanding his men to attack, to rush the cabin. But when the door burst open, it was Septimus who emerged, transformed. His wounds had healed completely. His golden eyes blazed with light that emanated from within. And around him was an aura that spoke of something more than mortal. The divine blood he had been accused of falsely claiming, now awakened by true love freely given. Hello, brother, Septimus said, his voice carrying power that made the soldiers step back. I believe we have much to discuss about your ambush, your conspiracy, and your attempt to steal my throne. Lucius stumbled backward, fear plain on his face. You should be dead. The curse should have killed you. Love breaks all curses. Septimus replied simply, Stand down, Lucius. Your hunt is over, and your treason will be answered. The soldiers, seeing their emperor transformed and terrible in his power, dropped their weapons and knelt. Lucius, realizing he was alone and defeated, drew his sword in desperate defiance. But before he could strike, Cassia stepped out of the cabin, moving to stand beside Septimus. Your brother faces you not alone, she said steadily, and I am not so easily intimidated anymore. Septimus looked at her, love and gratitude shining in those golden eyes. Together then, whatever comes. Together, Cassia agreed, and in the forest clearing, illuminated by divine light and surrounded by soldiers who had come to hunt an emperor but found instead a force beyond their understanding, the runaway bride and the cursed emperor stood united, having found in each other the salvation neither had sought but both desperately needed. Dawn broke over the forest in shades of gold and crimson, painting the clearing where Lucius stood defeated and surrounded by his own men who had turned against him. The divine light that had emanated from Septimus during the night had faded, but its effects remained. His wounds fully healed, his strength restored, and the curse completely broken. Cassia stood beside him, exhausted but resolute, watching as the soldiers who had come to hunt them now knelt in allegiance to their true emperor. She had not slept, had spent the long night watching Septimus interrogate his brother and extract confessions from the conspirators. Lucius knelt in chains, his dark eyes filled with hatred even in defeat. You cannot prove anything. The Senate will not simply accept your word against mine. I am regent, recognized by the full Senate. You are a man who disappeared for months, who hid like a coward. I have the testimony of 8 soldiers who participated in the ambush. Septimus replied calmly, I have written orders bearing your seal, and I have you, brother, caught attempting to murder me a second time. They will demand proof of your identity, Lucius argued. You could be an impostor, without the imperial seal, without witnesses from the palace. He has me, Cassia interrupted. I am Cassia Liviana, daughter of Senator Marcus Livianus. I have lived at court, seen the emperor many times. I can testify to his identity. Lucius laughed bitterly. The runaway bride, the girl who fled her own betrothal. Your testimony will be worthless, tainted by your criminal flight. My lawyers will destroy your credibility in moments. Cassia felt anger surge, but Septimus placed a hand on her arm. Actually, Lucius, I believe Cassia's testimony will carry considerable weight, because she will not be testifying as a runaway fugitive, but as the Empress of Rome. My wife, married before witnesses in this very forest. The clearing fell silent. Cassia turned to stare at him, her mouth opening but no words emerging. They had pretended to be married to deceive soldiers, but that had been fiction. Septimus looked at her, his golden eyes warm despite the formal tone. If you will have me, that is. I am not doing this to secure your testimony or to trap you. I am asking because these past 2 weeks have shown me what I was missing. A partnership of equals, someone who sees me as a man rather than just an emperor. He knelt before her, there in the clearing with all the soldiers watching. Emperors did not kneel, not even before gods, certainly not before women. But Septimus knelt in the dirt and pine needles, looking up at Cassia with vulnerability and hope. You ran into the wilderness to avoid being claimed, he said softly, and I would claim nothing from you, but I would ask for your heart, freely given, if you are willing to share it with a man who loves you and would spend his life proving himself worthy. Cassia felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by what he was offering, not a political alliance or a marriage of convenience, but a true partnership, a choice made freely by both parties. I ran to avoid being claimed, she agreed, her voice shaking. But I find that I do not mind being chosen, if I am also doing the choosing. Yes, Septimus Aurelius. Yes, I will marry you. Not because you are emperor, not because it would restore my reputation, but because I love you and want to face whatever comes next together. Septimus stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made several soldiers avert their eyes. When they finally separated, both were smiling despite the tears, despite the exhaustion. Well, Lucius said acidly, how touching. The emperor finds love in a forest cabin while Rome falls apart. Actually, said a new voice from the edge of the clearing. The gods seem quite pleased with recent developments. Everyone turned to see an elderly woman emerging from the trees, leaning on a staff, her white hair loose around her shoulders. As she approached, Cassia felt a strange sensation, as if the air itself grew heavier, charged with power. "Who are you?" Septimus demanded, though his voice carried respect. "I am the one who laid the curse," the woman replied. "You claim divine blood you did not possess, Septimus Aurelius. You allowed the people to worship you as descended from Apollo when you knew the truth, that your golden eyes came from bloodline rather than divine favor." She studied them both. The gods do not appreciate false claims, but they also value genuine virtue. You were cursed to die slowly, unless someone could love you not for your power but for yourself. And you, she turned to Cassia, fled to avoid being treated as property, only to find someone who saw you as a partner. "So the curse is truly broken?" Septimus asked. "More than that," the old woman said. "In breaking the curse through genuine love freely given, you have proven yourself worthy of the divine favor you claimed. The gods acknowledge you now. Your descendants will carry true divine blood, blessed by those you once falsely claimed as ancestors." She turned to leave but paused. "A word of advice, Emperor. Rule with the wisdom you have learned in these weeks. Remember what it means to be mortal. And you," she looked at Cassia, "do not let him forget that he is a man first and an emperor second." Then she was gone, disappearing into the forest as mysteriously as she had appeared. The journey back to Rome took 3 days. Septimus sent riders ahead to announce his return and arrest conspirators. By the time they reached the city gates, crowds had gathered, citizens who had mourned their emperor now celebrating his miraculous return. The wedding ceremony was held a week later, a grand affair in the Temple of Jupiter, with the full Senate in attendance and crowds filling the streets. Cassia wore imperial purple and gold, but Septimus had insisted she also wear a simple pine wreath, a private symbol of the cabin where their love had begun. During the ceremony, as the priests blessed their union, Cassia thought about how far she had come from the terrified girl who had fled into the wilderness. She had run from being claimed, had fought desperately for her freedom, had been willing to die rather than submit to a marriage that would have destroyed her. And now she stood willingly beside a man who had claimed nothing, who had offered everything, who had proven that love was about choice and partnership rather than possession and control. "What are you thinking?" Septimus whispered as they stood before the altar. "That I am glad I ran into the forest that night," Cassia replied. "That I am glad you knocked on my door. That every terrible thing that led us to that cabin was worth it for what we found there. Even the curse and the hunt and the near death?" Septimus asked, a smile playing at his lips. "Especially those things," Cassia said. "They showed us who we truly were, stripped of titles and expectations. In that cabin you were not an emperor, and I was not a senator's daughter. We were just two people learning to trust each other, discovering that love can grow even in the hardest soil." The ceremony concluded, and they emerged to the roar of the crowd. As they stood on the temple steps, she looked out over Rome, the city that had been her prison and was now her home, the empire that had demanded her submission and now offered her partnership in its rule. "Are you ready?" Septimus asked, offering her his hand. Cassia took it, feeling the strength and the gentleness together. "I am ready. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Septimus agreed. And as they descended the temple steps to begin their reign, the crowd chanting their names, Cassia thought about the old woman's words, that she should not let Septimus forget he was a man first and an emperor second. She would hold him to that. She would remind him in private moments of the cabin in the pines where he had been simply Septimus and she had been simply Cassia. Years later, historians would debate the facts, whether the curse had been real or metaphorical, whether the gods had truly intervened. But Cassia and Septimus knew the truth. They had both run from being claimed, both sought freedom from the roles others had assigned them. And in running, they had found each other, had discovered that the freedom they sought was not in being alone, but in being seen and choosing to be together. The empire flourished under their rule. Septimus kept his promise, establishing schools for women and opening libraries to all citizens. Cassia became known as a patron of learning and philosophy. Together, they ruled with wisdom born of suffering and compassion learned in hardship. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when palace duties were done, they would tell each other stories of the cabin in the pines, of the desperate days when they had nothing but each other, and somehow that had been enough. They would remember the moment when love freely given had broken a curse and transformed both their lives. The runaway bride and the cursed emperor, united not by decree or necessity, but by love that asked for nothing and gave everything, ruling an empire together but never forgetting the small cabin where their true reign had begun.